Hi, and thanks for joining us here in the Goalkeepers podcast. So, today we're going to be talking about the presentations in April. So, we're trying to figure out what some of those visual cues are with Coach Brett. Coach Brett, please tell us a little bit about where you are.
Yeah, Brett Rosenberger, American born, played in the U.S. collegiately, played professional here in the States and over in Germany, active duty military in between. Um, I'm out on the East Coast right now. I'm in the D.C. Baltimore area, working with. I'm a head coach of a men's team in the UPSL, and I coach in the ECNL for some local clubs. I'm about to transition out to the West Coast, where I'm going to be the new academy director for Oakland Roots USL Championship on an interesting program that they've got started up out there. So, looking forward to that. That's about 3 weeks away, but pretty excited about that project. So, that's a little bit about me. Try to get in, and we've done everything from coaching to coach education to curriculum development, the whole thing. So it's been kind of a fun journey the last 15 years or so.
That's fantastic. And I'm wondering just a little bit about your topic for this month regarding the visual cues, goalkeepers. Can you please talk to us a little bit about you already had your presentation, but can you talk to us a little bit about um, what that meant to you and what you did during your presentation?
Yeah, it's actually the whole lineup for the month is really is pretty exciting because it's really that lesson that kind of takes theoretical knowledge for a lot of young goalkeepers and is putting a really fine point on it. Like, what is the actual moment? What is the action? What are you seeing that's causing you to engage in the next action, whatever that is? Most of the sessions are actually going to be on the goalkeepers kind of reading stuff in the final third, shots, crosses, stuff that the next action is them participating on a goalkeeping level. So the first week, Coach Tony and I actually took a different approach, and we really focused on the organizing of the defense. So we really took the visual cues that you would see during a game during build up against you. And so we were talking about how could you analyze the problem? How might you organize your defense? What types of specific things would cause you to look here, look there, make this decision, make that decision?
Now, when building those blocks, when building those blocks, as far as the decision making blocks, how does it how do you transition from looking at stuff and then starting to make it routine to where the problems keep coming back? Because a lot of the problems, a lot of the issues that we face on the field as goalkeepers, we keep seeing over and over and over again. So how does one, as a young goalkeeper, we'll just go with like 12, right? We don't want to go too young, but like say 12, 13. How does that how do I transition as a player, right? From, oh, I've seen this before, this is what I should be doing, and from that, looking at it, identifying it, and then ultimately acting on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to get there, right? The Slowboat is you can keep kind of putting the idea and the concept in front of the athlete, and then at first they'll grab it kind of haphazardly or intermittently, and you just keep plugging away. That's one approach. I take a different approach just because it's something that I was exposed to as a young coach. So I watched the Germans, and a lot of times the Germans would put people in a situation. They say you have to make it a habit, even in instances where they don't understand that habit yet. And what they meant by that was they said at some point understanding is still the end goal. I don't want you to do it just because we said do it, but some lessons, especially for a goalkeeper, they involve a lot of 3D spatial orientation, a lot of anticipation, knowing how spaces and things are moving dynamically. These are skills that are sometimes not available to a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, sometimes 14-year-old. So what they would say is in those instances, let's get the habit in place so that by the time they do have the capacity to understand these concepts and really begin to wrestle with them, we don't have to now unlearn a bad habit while they're learning all these concepts and the understanding of why. What they'll do is they'll enter that phase. They have the the movements, they have the patterns, they have the habits of doing these things. Now we just have to attach the meaning why. And so it's a little different approach, but it's one that I've found to be a little bit more effective. So kind of back to your question, the 12-year-old, what we start doing is a big thing that I see that we do that I haven't seen from a lot of other people is we start integrating anything visual into the skill. So if the situation called for the goalkeeper to slide 2 steps left, and we believe that while you're sliding left, you should be tactically observing to the right. So now for us, that skill isn't just 2 steps left. It's 2 steps left with a head twist back right. And so when we're doing these repetitions, we're putting that visual component into every skill set. And so once again, hopefully the hope is further down the line, you're going to have these kids, we're going to attach meaning to that visual side. We're going to put more detail to that visual side, but they're already going to be in the habit of step left, look right.
Now with those, now that okay, so you said that like really easy, right? Like, hey, Art, pick up your pen with the right hand. So like that's the way you do it, right? That's the right habit. But in my mind, as a 12-year-old, maybe 13, 14, 15, I want to know why. And sometimes you're right. We can't explain the why necessarily in the right in an age appropriate way right away. There's just things. This is how you do things, or this is how you should do things. So, how do you as a coach? Let's do that. How do you as a coach figure out that balance between giving them the information, not giving them the why, and then when they ultimately start to figure out the why for themselves, because that's a skill, that's like a huge skill to have.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes out a couple ways, at least in my experience. You'll have some kids that want to know why right away, and I never have a problem explaining the why, because, like I said, there are theories, there are averages, there are ages when generally people will begin to understand it, but those are averages within a population. So there's always going to be exceptions to those averages. So I have no problem kind of explaining the why. A lot of times, when we go this way, you begin to get the kid to ask the why. My experience is if I can get the kid to ask why versus me telling them why, we're already a step ahead in the process, because their brain is wrapping around the concept. They're requesting the information. So although it's not, I'm not trying to play games with them. A lot of times when we say, look, this is what we're conditioning, we're trying to create this habit. And when they come back and say why, the mind is engaging in that next exchange of information a little differently than if I just talk and they listen. So a lot of times we'll start out with simple things, like we'll get a question all the time. Like we'll have them, okay, the scenario is we'll use that same one. They have to move somewhat to the left. And when we're asking them, as you move left, we want you looking right. A lot of times what we'll do is, most kids, if you just say that, they're just going to whip their head to the right, and it's just going to be kind of a token. It's like field players when they say check your shoulder, and you see these kids whip their head to the side, but they didn't see anything. They just snapped it side to side. So a lot of times you can do some simple things, and we always put very simple problem solving back to that right. So you can have another goalkeeper, you could have another coach, and we've done everything from hold up fingers. And so the goalkeeper now has to call out 3 fingers, 2 fingers, 1 finger, so that I know you've slid left, you've looked right, and you've made one cognitive process. And just, we've also done with like racquetballs, a red one and a blue one, and they're calling out the color red, blue as they're sliding left. What you're looking for as a coach is, did the technical movement of sliding to the left, did it decay? So did I have to, basically, the brain only has so much bandwidth, and so can I walk and chew gum? Can I slide left at a decent pace, at a decent technical accuracy, and can I look right and execute both, or can I do one at the expense of the other? And that's where we'll begin the coaching. Now that just lays the foundation, but that gets them in the habit now of, okay, every time that, and I'm talking more on that build up again, but once again, if the ball goes left and something in my attention has to go left, the one thing that I see a lot of keepers miss is now the whole team is looking to the left when the ball goes left. And one of the jobs for the coach or the goalkeeper is to be able to, you're that final layer of recon. I'm going to use some military term. You're that final layer of surveillance. I have to see what they can't see. And so when the ball goes left and my whole team looks left, one of the areas we're exposed is right. And if the goalkeeper doesn't look there, no one's looking there. And so this is one of the things you'll see keepers slide to the near post. You'll see keepers, and what we'll ask is, okay, so if you have two jobs, you have to kind of track the ball on the left, but I am responsible for anything happening on the right. I have to communicate it. I have to react to it. Can I do that from the near post? Am I in a good position to do that? What would be a better position? Where could I be where I could do both jobs? And so forth and so on. And you slowly start working the kid back through, and it ends up being a very big technical, tactical kind of exchange with a young kid, 12, 13, 14, perfect age, to be honest.
Yeah, and so two things stood out. If you're a parent listening, you just got a ton of information there, like a ton of information that may not be relevant to you, right? You just let the kids enjoy their stuff, right? Um, but again, you can tell the difference if you're an educated parent, if you follow, the right people, hang out with the right coaches, and are in the right clubs. You have a good coach. You can tell the difference between a okay coach, a good coach, and an outstanding coach, right? Um, so and there are layers to this stuff. So Brett just gave you every layer of little bit of information on taking two steps to the left. Okay. Now, if you're a coach, it's the same thing, right? There's things, for example, that he just mentioned, very simple, right? The visual cues, the turning. And for example, right, like I tell my 16-year-olds, my 15-year-olds, check your shoulder all the time. And they do. Half of the time they do it so I don't have to say it again, right? So it's not necessarily that they're looking and checking and scanning for information. They're just looking and checking and scanning so they don't have to hear my voice, right? And there's a big difference between doing things with purpose and just doing things just because, oh, coach said to do them. And that's where, I think that's where, Brett, you're mentioning the fact that when the kids, regardless of age, right? Because I coach 5 and 6 year olds, and they ask why, right? But why? One of the things that I do, just real briefly, is I play a lot of 4v2s and 4v1s, right, with the little ones. And the one kid's like, "What is this? This isn't soccer. What are you doing to me?" So I have to explain to them in their language what it is that they're doing. But again, it's that now you're engaging, and it's that next level of cognitive reasoning between the player and coach. And now you're setting that expectation that as a player, I can ask questions and I should be able to understand the exercise. So, yeah, I appreciate that explanation, Brett. And so my next question is, right, now that we're in goal, the game is happening. Um, how does one become a leader? How does a goalkeeper now that they're looking at the situation that's in front of them, everybody's looking left, they're looking right, they can see the next play developing, not the play now, but the next play developing, right? How does one now transmit that information to the field players?
Yeah, so this is where now you get into, especially leadership is an interesting thing because there's so many leadership styles. There are so many different ways of leading. So you can be hyper aggressive and you can kind of be boisterous, especially at that young age. These kids are growing at different differentials. So if you're that kid that's 2 years ahead, it fits the part that you are kind of domineering. And so a lot of kids will accept that type of leadership. So if you're very hyper aggressive because you're that 12-year-old that looks like a 14-year-old, kids will submit to that a lot of times. There are other times though that something that's a little bit more enduring, at least for me, is now we begin to challenge. And this is why I do believe I come from a school of thought that leaders aren't born, they're developed. And so there are people that will argue with me just on that foundation. But I will say it is, there are some people that have skill sets that seem to be more natural for it. But I will tell you, those skills were developed and honed, maybe somewhere else, maybe in a different environment. Maybe it's at home with their brothers and sisters, maybe it was at school, but they were developed somewhere. And so one of the things that I've noticed is if I can give people information sooner, calmer in a way that they can process it early, that is seen as more valuable than screaming at the last second or yelling after the play. Hey, you should have done this. You got to be here. That's more commentating for me. So it's not, you're going to miss the opportunity for leadership. So what we'll try to challenge these kids and how we'll connect these two lessons is say, okay, so something's happening left. We are asking you to look right because we want you to recognize the problem as early as possible. And now we begin challenging them. This is back to visual cues. Out of everything that you saw, what was the first thing that told you this is really a threat that we need to deal with versus, hey, this could have gone 100 different ways and not really become anything? And you work with the kids and you go back through, and this is where a lot of video is really useful if you have it, because the kid can walk you back through and say, here, no, here, wait, how about here? And then when you ask them, what are you watching? What are you looking at? Because there's a lot of stuff going on the right, in that, to kind of carry out that same example. There's a lot of stuff. So now you're trying to say, what is it that convinced you that said now it's a problem? Because I can tell you what convinced me, and I can tell you what's convinced other people playing above you. I can tell you what they're looking at. I can tell you what guided their decisions. But I need to find out what's guiding your decision. And then we can find out, maybe the kid sees something nobody else saw. It's always possible. But maybe there's a way now to map what you're seeing. A lot of times I'll see things like a young kid will look at, say, 2 or 3 things in the order of A, then B, then C. And the interesting thing to me is if you flash forward to a professional looking at that same situation, they look at C, then B, then A. And so what we'll usually talk with the young kids is, why is that? Because they started the same way as you. They looked at ABC when they were 12, but why did they change to C, B, then A? Why are they looking at it in a completely different order? Why did they put a different priority to C and A than what you did? And so you can get a pretty healthy conversation going with kids when you kind of present it this way.
Holy moly. Okay. So nah, and here's the thing, right? And this is why it's so valuable for kids to jump in on the weekends, for coaches, right? Like I'm very lucky because I get, I get to see this stuff every Monday or, the Monday afterwards or whatever. So I actually go through this stuff. But that's why it's super important to go through this, because in order for that process to go from A to B to C and then go from C to B to A, because and maybe I'm wrong, and please correct me if I'm wrong, right? What I'm thinking is, as adults, we think about the outcome or the consequence first, and then we kind of break, then we kind of think about how we're gonna get there, right? So then I got to go. So C is the consequence, B is the how, and then A is the initial action, right? Something like that, right? And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But in order for that piece of development, go ahead, Brett.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's a little different for me because it'll be, in every situation, even for little kids, there's still a couple things that could happen. You don't know. It's not a bunch of robots out there. So you're kind of trying to prepare for the unprepared. As a goalkeeper specifically, one of the challenges you have is, out of all those threats, there are certain threats that are more unrecoverable. So if they play it, you're not going to be able to do. There's no adjustment you can make at that point. They found it. They beat you. It's now you on the forward or whatever the scenario is. It's unrecoverable. Then after that, there's going to be certain situations that are recoverable, but you're going to have to move incredibly fast. And then there's a whole other set of scenarios that are maybe problematic, but easy to manage. And so what I'll see is, a lot of times in those scenarios, if you want to break it down that way, a lot of times when kids are going A, then B, then C, and the reason that change has happened isn't necessarily because of I wouldn't say necessarily the outcome, but it's which one is unrecoverable. I need to take that one away. Take that one away. And now everything else, even if I don't stop anything else, it's at least more manageable. So for example, and I'll give you just an easy example, but for kids, sometimes you'll see these teams where you'll talk with a goalkeeper and they'll say, hey, how's the season going? How are these goals coming? Man, I get scored on all the time on breakaways. It's just nonstop breakaways all the time. And you're like, okay, so if it's nonstop breakaways, then we've missed something to cut out the breakaway. So I'll see that a lot with kids where they say, hey, I've given up. Some kids that keep track of it, I've given up, 12 goals and 10 of them have been on breakaways. Okay, good. So that gives me an idea where we can start. but but it's a lot of times kind of stuff like that, and then you work, and a lot of times that's been my experience. The pros work backwards from unrecoverable to very difficult to manageable, and that's a lot of times why their cues have flipped as well.
Yeah, and the part that I love about that breakdown is that I believe that's the way you operate. And that's because of your experience and the way that you learn how to do things, and just basically how you just operate basically on everything. Right. And this is why it's so important for kids. And this is the point I was trying to make earlier, was that this is why it's so important for the kids and the players to put themselves in the same room as someone like you, because that process of going from A to B to C, and then switching that to C, B, and A is going to be a lot faster when they recognize and see these things more often, and it's explained to them, um, you know, more frequently than not. And a lot of information, right? I mean, soccer, and we've said this before. Soccer, we're not reinventing the wheel. Soccer's already there. But the fact is that as kids and players, even I to this day still need that information being told multiple times, because um being able to retain it, being able, you got to learn it, retain it, and then you got to execute it. It's very different than, hey, you got to possess the ball. Okay, well, great, I can possess the ball. Okay, great. Right. And now you're hearing possession all the time, and now possess. But when it's not being taught, then you lose the whole point, right? So that's why it's so important to look at these videos, look at this information, and be like, okay, cues. What are the cues? And how do I now go from looking at the cues to making a decision, to now transmitting that information to the next to my field players? And how do I do that in a way that is going to allow them to be successful? So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and it gets really dynamic. Of course, the kids get older and older, but even at a young age, they'll have little hints of it. They'll know that, okay, so let's say you've solved the problem. You know the problem. Now I have to communicate that solution to say my defenders. But this is still kind of pretty generic information, because really, of those four defenders or three defenders, whatever you're playing, maybe there's one weak player and two or three strong ones. Maybe they are quick, maybe they're fast, maybe they're slow. I mean, you've got all these variables that honestly may change how you communicate that information. Like if in that scenario, if I have a ball that's left, and my right back is kind of a space cadet, and he's still hanging clear out over by the edge of the box, and then now there's a huge gap between, say, my right back and my center back on that side. Well, instead of telling my whole defense, hey, watch this, slide right, pay attention to this, I'm talking to him specifically. Hey, at least get inside and let's make them go all the way around us. Don't give them this nice big, traffic lane right through the middle of our back four to get in. Because as a goalkeeper, if I don't fix that, I'm taking a shot from dead center, versus if I pull him in, maybe they still get a shot, but now it's way off angle on the side. So I'm kind of prepping, yes, maybe they're going to get a shot. We can't stop that, but I can't control what shot you get. And so this is stuff, but it takes a while, right? This isn't, you don't learn this at 12. You begin learning this at 12. And I always say the first lessons are, I've got to get the eyes. I have to create the possibility to solve the problem. So right now, just get the eyes turning there. Get the eyes turning to the correct information. Get the eyes focusing, out of all the things I could watch on, get the eyes focusing on the things that matter. And then we'll begin, once I can get the eyes seeing and collecting that information, now the possibility of solving the problem, it's possible now. But if I have a kid that just races to the near post, always looks left, just like every one of his teammates, we can't even really start to get into the tactical of, hey, you got to watch backdoor runs and blah, blah. I mean, because they can't see it. And it's an old military thing. I can't defend what I can't see. So I got to be able to see it first. There's an order. I've got to be able to see it so that I can make a decision about it. So we kind of walk through in that order.
Yeah, and you just said it. All this information, right? It's surface. And that's not to, it's very, very surface. We're just beginning to scratch it, and that's why it's super important that you jump on these calls, get the information, because if you have any questions, you can definitely dive a little deeper. So as we wrap up the call, Brett, how do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, right now you can get me Brett38324 at Gmail. That's probably the best way. Also, you can find me on WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Instagram, all those things. So, yeah, happy to help. And same thing, sometimes you're teaching the kids, sometimes you're teaching the coaches how to teach the kids. So it's, I actually enjoy both. I'm still probably a coach at heart. If I had a choice of two, I'd go with the kid on the field. But of the two, we've been doing both for a while, so I've enjoyed it.
Fantastic. I appreciate everything that you do for us, and we'll look. Well, your presentation is already up, so we're looking forward to hopefully checking it out. So thank you, Brett.
Awesome. Thanks, Art.
Thank you.